January 16th, 2014. This is the Hermetic Hour, and I'm your host, Pope Runyon. Now, tonight, we present a discussion on the ancient Phoenicians and the Hermetic tradition. Now, this follows last week's review of Jesus the Phoenician by Karim El-Kousa, and the references for this evening's discussion will be the recent book Phoenician Secrets by Sanford Host and The Phoenicians, the Purple Empire of the Ancient World by Gerald Herm. Our focus will be on Phoenician contributions to and influence on Western occultism and magic. Now, it has recently been established that the Phoenician culture is one of the oldest in the world, and its roots go back 9,000 years. The Phoenicians were building and sailing ocean-going ships long before the pyramids of Egypt were built. And the first pyramid was built by European architects brought from Malta to Egypt by Phoenician contractors. The Phoenicians were very secretive about their business and their religion. We will discuss their astrological religion, the labors of Hercules, their magical alphabet, the real origin of the Kabbalah, and their possible connection with Atlantis. So, if you want to voyage with the purple people in ancient seas, tune in and we'll hoist the mainmast. Now, I'm going to make a little correction on that. I think maybe the Phoenicians kept the yardarm attached up there at the top of the main, which means that they probably dropped the sail instead of hoisting it. But either way. Now, the first thing we need to explain is this. I mentioned Sanford Host's very excellent book, The Phoenician Secrets. That just came out, by the way. That's 2011. And then The Phoenicians, the Purple Empire of the Ancient World by Gerald Herm. He's a German author. And that appeared here in America in 1975. Now, I want to make it clear, both these books are excellent, by the way. And what I want to make clear before we start, that I am not scrupulously, I'm not being a scholar now. I'm not scrupulously following just their information. I'm extrapolating from it, and both of these very good scholars would not, in a million years, ever use the A word. They wouldn't. And don't think because I'm using the A word that they would use the A word. They might secretly want to, but being good scholars, they won't. But we're going to use the A word. Now, Woody, of the Phoenicians. And this is, by the way, for those of you who don't know what a Phoenician is, Phoenician, the word Phoenician is Greek, and it comes from basically purple people, and it means that this little fish called the murex, little shellfish, it produces a beautiful, beautiful, rich purple dye, but it doesn't produce very much of it. So the Phoenicians produced this purple dye, and they were the only ones who had it, and they were the only ones who could use it, and they dyed beautiful purple cloth, and of course they traded that, and it was so valuable that it became the symbol of royalty, and only the kings and the highest nobles could afford this purple cloth that the Phoenicians were making. So the Phoenicians, from this resource they had, they became known as the Purple People, or the Royal Phoenicians, as it were. Now, it has been thought that the Phoenicians were kind of latecomers to ancient history, and the Phoenicians have been really kind of given a downgrading in the cultural civilization department to where they came up late, and supposedly the Egyptians, they copied their ships from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians went up there first and brought the cedars of Lebanon down to Egypt back in the Second Kingdom, and the Phoenicians got all their ideas from that, and then they started doing it. All of this is not true. More recent archaeology and historical research has established that the Phoenicians were not a bunch of desert nomads down in Sinai who just happened to wander up there and around, a little bit before the time of Solomon, a little bit around the time of Moses. They just kind of wandered up there, and then they started this business and shipping. And no, this isn't true. The Phoenician culture has been there in one form or another. It has been there in Lebanon and in northern Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. It's been there for 9,000 years. And the Baalbek, and I'm sure you've all heard about the huge stones in Baalbek. And this is a very, very, very ancient Phoenician city. So we have to take another look at the Phoenicians. It's time that we did take another look at them, because it turns out that the Egyptians, the Phoenicians were the ones who brought the cedars down to Egypt and brought the architects over from Malta, the European architects over from Malta, to build the first pyramid for Dozer's first pyramid, that step pyramid, way down the Old Kingdom. Yeah, that was over 3,000 BC. Yeah, and the Phoenicians were the ones who literally civilized the Egyptians. The Egyptians before this time were living in one-story brick buildings, one-story brick huts, and their tombs were what they called mastabas. They were just low brick structures along the ground. Without the Phoenicians, there would have been no Egyptian architecture, or it would have been a lot later. And these great Egyptian architectural accomplishments, including all the pyramids, really have their origin in both in the Phoenicians bringing down the timber, and now these are ocean-going ships. Now we're talking about ocean-going ships 3000 BC. The first ocean-going ships in a long, long time in the Mediterranean, and were built by the Phoenicians. And so what are we looking at here? We're looking at people who are they're so far beyond everybody else technologically that we have to wonder where is this coming from? Now, we know that the Phoenicians were indigenous to this land and this area and the coast. Now, the Phoenician historian Sancho Neothan says that Kusor, that's the craftsman god of the Phoenicians and the Canaanites, and he's also analogous to Tubal-Cain in the Bible. So according to Sancho Neothan, Kusor invented the fishing boat. Way back in the beginning before history, he invented the fishing boat. All right? Now, I want to make a little point here, and I think this will be helpful to some people who are trying to, especially if you're a victim of Marxist archaeology. And Marxist archaeology has to prove that everything evolves from the simple to the complex. There's no such thing as cycles in Marxist archaeology. So consequently, we have to have a sequence that goes from hunter-gatherers to crude agriculture, and then it has to go up from there, and then from after we get agriculture, then we start having irrigation, and then next thing you know, we have a little village, and then it just keeps going up, and finally reaches writing and all that. That's Marxist archaeology, but that's not what's going on here. And there's one thing about this, even if you don't have agriculture, this is one thing the anthropologists don't want to tell you, especially if they're Marxists. if you don't have agriculture, if you do have, all you need for civilization, now all you need for a civilization to develop is a fixed, steady food supply at one point. If you've got that, then you can have civilization. You don't need agriculture. Consequently, the Ice Age maritime civilization, and believe me, it was maritime. That Ice Age civilization, when the sea level was 200 feet lower, huge salmon run. At a rate, because some of it's still there. You know, you go up to Scotland to fish for salmon. That was the salmon run. Now, so both the Magdalenian, Cro-Magnon culture, salmon was one of their staples, and of course the Atlantean people right off the southern coast of England and off the coast of Spain and France, that salmon was their main one. Now, I'm not sure what the fish was that got the Phoenicians going, but there certainly was. Their cities are all right along the coast. And remember now, Cousteau invented the fishing boat. So that's how it got started. And that's how you can have civilization even before you have agriculture. Now, one of the things I want to point out also, too, is that we are becoming aware more and more and more, and the archaeologists or the professional archaeologists, the university archaeologists are being very quiet about it. We're becoming very, very aware of the steadily advancing antiquity of the ancient civilization itself. Now, as most of you probably know, up in Anatolia, right north of Syria and right north of Lebanon, in Anatolia, we've now found a city, that stone city, and with magnificent carvings and monuments and all that, 11,000 years ago. All right? Now, a few years back, that would have been considered impossible. Now, as I said, and this, by the way, comes from Sanford Holt's book, the Phoenicians brought architects and stonemasons from Malta or perhaps further west, to Egypt to build the first pyramid. In other words, we have on Imhotep. I think Imhotep may very well have been a Maltese, and that means he was a European. By the way, this idea has been around a while. It's getting more and more credibility. If you remember that movie, I think it was called Land of the Pyramids with Joan Collins and Hawkins, and they had a European architect in there building the Great Pyramid. But so when we say a European architect, what exactly are we talking about? Now, as you also may be aware, that there is this, what I would call this Atlantean culture. Hatcher Childress calls it the Osirian culture. That's pre-Egyptian. That stonework, this monolithic stonework, what they call Cyclopean architecture, or maybe it's Cyclopean architecture. I don't know. Is it Cyclopean or Cyclopean? I think it's probably Cyclopean because you don't have a Cyclops, you have a Cyclops. But anyway, this architecture is the architecture of the huge stones. The stones that are so big you can't figure out how anybody raised them. And they're piled and, and fitted and stacked in these absolute, they look like they're made by giants. And this architecture is, well, it's 10,000 years old. I mean, you find it in the chamber tombs going down to the coast in Spain and in France. You find it in the huge earthworks in the southern England. You find it. I'll get into Tartessos and some of the sunken Spanish cities a little bit, but there is this culture, this European culture that moves eastward. It moves eastward through the Mediterranean, and you hit Malta, this little island of Malta, and it has a temple complex, partially underground and above ground. You have this temple complex that is called the Hypogeum, by the way, and this is one of the oldest buildings and temple complex in the world. And the stones are huge, and this is real Cyclopean architecture. Now, so according to what Sanford Holst is suggesting, the Phoenicians, by the way, and they remember now, these are supposedly a Semitic people, a Canaanite people, and they had a very close relationship with the Maltese. Now, this relationship that the Phoenicians had with the Europeans, that's the Maltese and the Minoans, is very, very close, and they work together, and we don't know quite how much the Maltese influenced the Phoenicians and how much the Phoenicians influenced the Maltese. But what Sanford Holst is saying is that they, with all this trade back and forth with Egypt. Now, by the way, Egypt was their best customer. Egypt was, once they got Egypt started building stuff, then the Egyptians, the only place they could get cedar was from the coast of Lebanon. And the mountains up in Lebanon were covered with beautiful big cedar trees. And the Egyptians had virtually no wood at all. So if they wanted to really build, they had to bring lumber down from the Lebanon, and the Phoenicians, of course, would supply it. They supply the trade. But the Phoenicians then began to roam all over the Mediterranean, and they very quickly got a hold of the Maltese, and they really had a good relationship with them. So they brought these Maltese architects, the kind of people who built the Hypogeum, to Egypt to help the Egyptians with their pyramid process. The Egyptians really did need help with pyramids. They really did. They built one after that. They built one after that called the Bed Pyramid. If you take a look at the Bed Pyramid, you can see how much help they needed. And so anyway, the basic thing here is that the Phoenicians and the Maltese were both very, very, very old cultures, and the Phoenicians were not only boat builders, shipbuilders, and sailors, they were also marvelous architects and stonemasons. Remember that now. They could carve. These people could carve, they could transport, they could set, they could build with stones that were today would give contractors the willies to try to figure out how to even shape them and use them. That one picture, one of those Trithinians at Baalbek, it doesn't look like people standing on top of a boxcar. It looks like people standing on top of an overturned 14-story building. And that this is perfectly rectangular and chiseled down to a fine. And how do you do this? Well, it probably isn't a landing pad for spaceships, but it is absolutely amazing. Now, this was Phoenician skill and Phoenician technology. Now, what they started to do after they established their Egyptian trade, and the Egyptians, for thousands of years, the Egyptians remained their major customers. They started to develop trade all over the Mediterranean, and their method was that they would establish bases. And these they're not exactly colonies. They started the colony business 1,000 years or so later, but they first started establishing trading bases, and these were kind of almost secret trading bases where they had little coves that they'd find, and then they would establish a base. So then they could distribute, and they could harbor their ships and take on water and provisions and all the various things you do when you have a maritime base. So they had these little bases all over the Mediterranean, and they kept them secret. The Phoenicians were and this was something else about them that really bears on a lot of factors, especially on the hermetic and the Masonic factors and all that. They were very, very secretive, and they were very tight-knit, and they kept their secrets, and they kept their secrets even to the point where a Phoenician skipper would sink his ship before he would let somebody following him find one of their bases. And of course he knew if he did that that the company that he worked for, because they were a big corporation, that they would reimburse him. Well, I had to do this, So what we have here is a very, very sophisticated, modern almost, and this is back 3000, BC. We have a very, very modern concept here of what is literally a corporation, and these coastal cities in Lebanon, this is Byblos, and then the Sidon, and then Tyre, and much later Beirut. But these cities were like, well, Tyre was out on an island, and Byblos was right down at a point of land. They would try to get these cities as isolated and protected as possible, and walled, and the idea here was to have the city was completely controlled by what we might refer to as the corporation. Now, there wasn't, this is kind of in a way, and let's discuss their political system here a little bit, because this has a bearing on a lot of things. It has a bearing, I think, on Plato, and it also has a bearing on Jesus. Their political system was kind of like what you might call corporate socialism. I know that sounds like fascism, but they weren't militaristic. And in fact, the Phoenicians would do anything to avoid fighting. But what they would do is, with a city and their ships, there was no such thing as private property, obviously, because they're so tight-knit that everybody has to live in the corporate compound. It's like if let's say you go you overseas and you go to some place in say in the Middle East where they don't like to have where you're liable to get accosted if your lady goes out wearing shorts or something like that. So you all live in the American compound. Well, obviously you can't own your house, so you have to rent it from the corporation. That's the way it was in Tyre and Sidon and with the rest of the Phoenicians. The city owned the property, and then they rented it, to people, and they took care of all of their people who needed taken care of. They didn't. It wasn't a welfare state, though. Everybody pulled their weight, and they had a tremendous work ethic. So they had what you'd say is a form of socialism, but it was very capitalistic because these guys were entrepreneurs. I mean, and the king, they elected their king. King was the chairman of the board, and they would get to the wealthier families. They would put money up for a voyage, and they were doing this just about the same way that Lloyd's of London would operate in the 19th century, and this was back 5,000 years ago, and out of that comes Plato's Republic, and out of that comes Jesus's particular what looks like extreme socialism with Jesus, and probably wasn't. He was probably being he's Canaanite. He's probably echoing the Harlequin days of the Phoenicians, and very peaceful people, but they were aggressive traders. They were very aggressive traders, very, very. and corporate socialism. I know that probably sounds good to those who, and also globalization too. Let's look at that, because globalization is a big thing now. Well, and multiculturalism. The Phoenicians, their own religion and their own philosophy, they kept very, very secret. But they were chameleons. When it came to other cultures, when they went to Egypt, they would dress like the Egyptians, and they would try to speak Egyptian, and they would just, and then they would tell the Egyptians, we worship Osiris too, all that. So they would have temples to the Egyptian gods to make the Egyptians happy, and the same thing all over the Mediterranean. And so they became, outwardly, they looked like a mixture of all kinds of cultures, a mixture of the Egyptian and the Minoan and all these things. It looked like Phoenician artwork and all, and you can't really determine the style, but their own religion and their own philosophy, and especially their astrology and their astronomy and their navigation and all of this was very, very private. And their alphabet was also one of their secret weapons, and that was private up till it finally leaked out about 1500 BC. The alphabet finally got out. Now, the Phoenician religion. Now, this is something that is also very important for us to understand, especially last week we did Karim El-Kusa's Jesus, the Phoenician. And he's not the only one, by the way, who has noticed this. Jesus had to be of Canaanite Phoenician extraction, because of this whole idea of resurrection. The idea of the resurrected, of the dying and resurrected God. This is Phoenician, and it's also Egyptian too. It replicates Osiris, but it primarily replicates Baal and Mot. What happens at summer solstice when Baal gets killed, and then Astarte has to come down from heaven and resurrect him. The Virgin Mary is resurrecting her son or whatever. But this was the oldest of the Phoenician rituals, and the dying and resurrected God and the eternal goddess was very, very, very important to them. And now this brings up a dark side. And this is a dark side that neither Holst or Herm want to deal with. But the Phoenicians did indulge in human sacrifice, and so the Carthaginians, which is their later colony, they supposedly really did, whatever. But that, the Jews did some human sacrifice too, but they didn't. By about 500 BC, the Jews had decided it was a terrible thing, and they stopped it. But the Phoenicians weren't quite so upset about it, and the reason is that they firmly believed in reincarnation, and the Jews did not. And the Phoenicians so firmly believed in reincarnation that even sacrificing your own child, if this was deemed serious enough and necessary, to them was awful and it was mournful and all that, but they didn't see that to them they weren't killing a soul. They were sending them on to hopefully better things or whatever. Now, I know I don't agree with that, and I'm sure we don't either. But then on the other hand, that was where it came from this tremendous assurance of reincarnation. Now, the same thing with the Druids, by the way, the European strain. The Druids were the same way. they believe in reincarnation so strongly that they would even settle debts in the next life. And of course, as we know, in India, up until recently, and I don't know, they may still do it, the wife throws herself on the husband's funeral pyre so she can go with him. And this is the what you might call the dark side of the reincarnation thing. However, remember that out of this, dark as it might be, out of this comes the religion of Christianity, and so we have to say that. I'm not trying to say that the Christianity practices human sacrifice, but it certainly celebrates it. And now that is as I say, the dark side of this thing. Now, as I said, Jesus' resurrection is essentially Osirian. In other words, by that, he sacrificed, and he goes up to heaven, and there he judges the quick and the dead. But whereas the Phoenician cycle, the God is killed every year and resurrected by the goddess and is reborn in modern cycle, reborn in the winter, in the old cycle, reborn in the spring. Now, you might say that therefore Jesus, the whole idea of Jesus comes from the Egyptian, but Egyptian religion and it was so familiar to the Phoenicians, and they were so eclectic in this that Jesus' influence is primarily from the Phoenician rather than the Egyptian. Now, I want to point out here that this Phoenician religion did not die until 300 A.D. They were still, in 300 A.D., they were still celebrating the death of the Ur king up there at Afaka in the Lebanon, where the spring runs out of the cave and down into the gorge, and the water hits the hematite layer in the river Ebram, and it runs red, and that's what Jesse Weston, the anthropologist back in 1920, said was the origin of the Holy Grail. Well, you go along with that. So this kept up all the way up till 300 A.D., and then finally St. Chrysostom, one of the Christian fathers, gathered a gang of hooligans and sent them to slaughter the court worshippers of Adonis and the goddess up there at Afaka. And that was the end of those Phoenician seasonal ceremonies until 1974, and we started them up again. Now, I wanted to look at some of the Masonic aspects of this Phoenician phenomenon. The Phoenicians were the oldest, best, and most highly organized international fraternity of architects and builders on the planet, and they kept it going for the longest time. Thousands and thousands of years that they kept this going, and they kept their secrets, and they were loyal to their company, and they were the master masons, and they were the master architects, the master shipbuilders, and the master sailors, and very, very much of an elite secret group, but tried as hard as they could to be friendly with everybody and to get along with everybody. They really did. Now, that sounds rather Masonic. Now, they built, or they helped to build, the pyramids, Solomon's Temple, and the Minoan Labyrinth, Palace of Knossos. There, before the Phoenicians arrived to help the Minoans, they didn't have any palaces. But Oh, boy, look what they ended up with. Now, Phoenician temple of Melkart. And here is where we really start getting into this esoteric and occult aspect. The Phoenician temple of Melkart in Tyre, and I need to explain that Melkart means the god of the town, god of the city. But they equated Melkart with the Greek Heracles, or the Roman Hercules, and Melkart was sort of like Balsamin, the solar aspect of Baal. Now we have to make sure you understand. Baal just means Lord. It just means Lord. So there's all kinds of different Baals, and there's Balsamin, god of the heavens. There's Baladad, god of thunder. And then there's Baal-Zephon, god of the mountain, and on and on and on. So, but Melkart was the original Hercules. Now, the original Hercules, remember now about the 12 labors of Hercules? Well, for heaven's sake, don't look into Greek mythology and think you're going to be able to solve the zodiacal initiatory code by looking at the labors of Hercules in Greek mythology, because they've really been mixed up and just really, really bent out of shape in retelling. But they originally came from the temple of Melkart in Tyre. And, now, in front of this temple were two pillars standing on the porch. They can be seen from seaward. And these pillars, according to Herodotus, these pillars, gold, and the other was emerald. And Herodotus said that you could see the emerald when shining, and the gold. Now, the gold pillar, obviously, well, this begins to sound like Yakhi and Maz in the Solomon's Temple. And sure, obviously, Hiram of Tyre, sent Hiram Abiff, another Phoenician, down there to help Solomon build the temple, and he cast these two brazen pillars, what was he using for a model? Obviously, the pillars in the temple of Melkart. But the gold pillar represents the sun, and the green pillar represents, what do you think? The planet Venus, the goddess. And then inside, and we probably have a big silver mirror or something like that. And so we have, but we have in a sense a Phoenician kind of tetragrammaton where you have the god and the goddess. That's El and Asherah of the sea, and then you have Baal and Astarte, or Baal and Tanit. Now, so the gold pillar is its sun, the emerald is Venus, and they worshipped the great father god El, and that's Aleph Lamed, by the way, and his holy lady Asherah of the sea. Now, El was the god of, well, all through the Bible, God is referred to as El, but El was the over god for all of the so-called 10 lost tribes, the 10 northern tribes of Israel. El was so it's very possible, although Holst doesn't back this up, but Holst is trying to stay pretty close to the Bible, and I don't blame him, but that temple was probably built for El. The Canaanite tribes, the northern tribes, were all worshippers of El rather than YHVH. And this means that Hiram Abiff was not just, he wasn't half Jewish and half Phoenician, he was all Phoenician. But Now, that's my opinion anyway. I mean, I'm not gonna put that in Holt's mouth, and I'm not gonna put it in Herbert's mouth. Now, let's go a little further. Enoch was a Phoenician prophet. Now, Enoch was a Phoenician prophet, and Masonry makes use of Enoch. So we're moving right along. That Enoch was a Phoenician prophet, and Mount Hermon, where those fallen angels descended. You remember that flying saucer that comes down on top of Mount Shasta, and the next thing you know, you got this three-eyed fellow with horns, and he's talking to you. Yeah, that's the fallen angels on top of Mount Hermon, which happens to be very much in the upper area of Lebanon. It wasn't in Israel at all. So Enoch was a Phoenician Canaanite prophet. Pretty good sense when you think about it. Now, I'm going to talk about the Atlantis connection here. Now, let me say this. Remember when I said at the beginning of the show, I said, well, neither Holst nor Herm would use the A word. And the A word, by the way, is it gets you kicked out of an anthropology seminar if you use it. The A word, of course, is Atlantis. And the evidence has been building up and building up and building up and building up toward Atlantis, to the point now where the archaeologists and the anthropologists, and as I say, so many of them are Marxists, and they're not. I don't mean they're subversive Marxists. I mean they have Marxist philosophy. Everything has to evolve from the simple to the complex. We don't have cyclic stuff. It says that's against dogma and Marxism. So the A word sets their teeth on edge. They don't want to hear it. But quite frankly, what we now know about the Phoenicians, they're definitely, I think personally, there's definitely a connection. And the Cyclopean architecture in the Hypogeum in Malta and all over the Mediterranean, actually, and some of the Mycenaean work seems to certainly predate the Mycenaeans. Now, another one that we'll mention here, along the line with this Atlantis idea, is a mysterious city sunk beneath the sands out by the shore in western Spain. And that is a legendary city called Tartessos. Now, Tartessos, nobody knows whether it was Phoenician or what it was, but it's underneath the sand. It's buried under 12 feet of silt, and off the western coast of Spain. And this city was mentioned in the Bible as Tarsus, very, very ancient city. But what's even more important than that is that the Phoenicians came back and built the city that is now Cadiz. They built that right next to it. But then further on up from Tartessos is another river mouth and another silted over city, which is vastly older than Tartessos and is laid out in the pattern of Poseidonus of Atlantis. Now, also, we might mention that Carthage, and we haven't talked too much about Carthage, but Carthage was that colony of the Phoenicians that Dido established and that fought with the Romans. And they wouldn't have fought with the Romans, except the Romans wanted to fight. And the Romans wanted to dominate trade, and Carthage had been established for many hundreds of years, and it was the trade hub for the Western Mediterranean. And the Romans were rising up in power, in the Roman Republic, and they decided that they would have to destroy Carthage, destroy this trading monopoly. And Cicero used to get up in the Senate, and he would shout to the top of his lungs, "Carthago delendum esset, Carthage must be destroyed." And so, of course, they did. They destroyed it. But interestingly enough, Carthage, the harbor in Carthage is also laid out like the harbor of Poseidonis in Atlantis. Now, so Carthage was destroyed. But interestingly enough, and this is really interesting, I think, the man who destroyed Carthage, Scipio Africanus, had a dream. And that dream that he had was about the initiatic code in a temple very much like the Temple of Melkart in Tyre. Now, a few hundred years before that, Tyre, I mean, 500 BC, something around there, Tyre, and that Temple of Melkart, Alexander the Great came down the coast with his army, and Byblos and Sidon and those Phoenician cities, they said, okay, we're not going to fight you, we'll capitulate and all that. And I was fine with Alexander, but he got to Tyre, and what he did is he camped his army across the strait from Tyre. It's on an island, fortified island, and he sent a message over to the Tyrians, and he said, I understand you have a temple to Hercules, and I want to come and make a sacrifice to the god Hercules in your temple. Well, the Tyrians priests and the king and the priests, they sent a message back, and they said, we will not permit that, but what we will do is come ashore and build an altar to Melkart, and you can make your sacrifice there. Well, Alexander had quite an ego, and not only did he have quite an ego, he also was trying for egotistical reasons and also for political reasons to make himself the god, to make himself God on earth, and so he had his army roll up their sleeves or whatever and build a causeway all the way out to Tyre, across this isthmus, across this passage, this big causeway, and then he attacked the city. Now it took him about almost 9 months to build it, and had to stop his conquest of Egypt and everything else to do this. But he went all the way across that and took this city, and then proceeded to sell 30,000 men, 70,000 women and children into slavery, and crucified 5,000 Phoenician priests and nobles and people leaders of the town. Crucified them. Why? Now, Gerald Herm can't figure that out. And why would he do that? Well, Alexander literally wanted to take on the mantle of Mithra, or at least he was going to be the killer of the bull, and he was going to bring in the age of Aries in his own way. And as you know, of course, Ptolemy ordered the zodiac according to Alexander. So Alexander proceeded to he proceeded to do this as a huge gesture, stern and harsh as it was, to establish his godhead in the age of Aries, kill the bull, this is pulls on astrology, by the way. The initiatic code was originally started with Aldebaran, and so he did this, and yet in Carthage, they still had it. They still had this initiatic code. So Scipio did the same darn thing. He wiped Carthage. He virtually wiped it off the face of the earth, and then he has this dream. So he recovers the initiatic code in a dream, Scipio's dream. Now, Westcott wanted to use this in the Golden Dawn in the Inner Order, but Mathers had the Enochian bit in his teeth and ran with it. So Westcott had to just settle for putting Scipio's dream in the Collectanea Hermetica. So if you want to look at it, you can look at it there. Now, let's talk a little bit about the alphabet, because the alphabet is really the alphabet is one of the big things. Now, as you know, the Phoenicians invented the alphabet, or at least that's as much as we know as they did. Now, we think they invented it around 1500 BC, but I think they probably had it a lot longer than that. Because being the way they were, they probably used it themselves, and they wrote everything down. There were some clay tablets. In fact, some clay tablets with the Phoenician alphabet have been discovered in southern France. The French Academy didn't like them too much, but at least nobody ever really discredited them. But that was on clay tablets. But the Phoenicians did almost all of their writing was done on papyrus, because they were the big papyrus distributors for the papyrus only grows in Egypt. So they were the big distributors of papyrus. In fact, Byblos, the Phoenician city of Byblos, was called Byblos because that's where the Greeks got their papyrus. And so but papyrus does deteriorate, and so we don't have, it's like bronze. You say, well, the Bronze Age began at such and such a time. Well, yeah, except that's before that bronze deteriorates, so we don't know how long it goes to Bronze Age. So consequently, we really don't know with the Phoenician alphabet. We don't know how old it is. We can't say it's 1,500 years. Of course, we say if Moses actually did the Ten Commandments, they would have been in Phoenician. And this alphabet, though, and this is really, really interesting. This alphabet only has 22 letters. Now, to get around the zodiac, you need 24 letters. When the Greeks got the alphabet from the Phoenicians, they added a couple of vowels and ended up with 24 letters, which got them around the zodiac just fine. And then, so you could say that in this sense, the Greeks invented the Kabbalah. But I'm not so sure about that, because what if the Phoenicians had their own astrological alphabet that had 24 letters? Yes, that's the reason they probably did. And of course, naturally, we've tried to reconstruct that. So, but that would be based definitely on bullseye astrology, where the Greeks, by the time they got going, they based theirs on Aries, on 0 degrees Aries. Now, so as I said, the code is revised basically in accord with the precession. Now, when Jesus comes along, he ushers in the age of Pisces. Now, you may ask why the Phoenicians, why we're crediting them. We like to think that astrology all began over there in Babylon and in Sumer, well, Akkad, whatever, in Assyria. Yeah, maybe so, with bullseye astrology, that's very true. But remember now, the Phoenicians were sailing by the stars. And so consequently, astronomy and astrology were very, very important to them. And where do we think Orphic cosmology came from? And so, quite frankly, we have very, very significant occult mysteries connected with the Phoenicians, and I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what these, at least the depth of this subject, I hope. And next week we're going to try to see if we can't get a guest an authoritative guest to come on and give us some more information about this. So, until next week, good magic.